Good evening, everyone, and welcome to She Emerged Sisterhood podcast. This is our 12th episode. And today with us, we have Pastor Camille Heron.
We, we,
Yes, she.
oh Lord.
And so, with that said, Cami for short is my pastor, and it is truly an honor for us to be in this space together. And so, without further ado, I would love for you to introduce yourself because I know for sure you don't like everyone. Y'all, this pastor, she don't like the hype. She don't like the bio, so I did not even go there with her.
Wow.
And yes.
Golly.
So, Pastor Cami is going to tell us a bit about herself.
All right. So, hi everyone. Hello to the entire She Emerge community. Um, yes, my name is Camille. I'm currently serving as senior pastor at Love Fellowship Ministries in Miami Gardens. Getting into my third year, so I'm a new pastor, first time pastoring. Outside of that, I did serve for about 20 years in the field of event management, both in a for profit as well as non for profit entities, volunteer with a lot of community groups. In between that, I, I love watching sports and I love cultures, love learning about cultures, love traveling. And I'm realizing more and more now that I love studying people in my own way. So I guess that would be it about me. I guess that should
Beautiful.
suffice.
She's saying
Oh, and
that's it in a
I'm a
nutshell.
student, and I'm a student. How could I forget that? That takes up a whole chunk of my life. But I'm also a
Yes.
student. Yes, that's right.
And so tell our audience what you're pursuing.
Pursuing is right because really, it's a chase. It is a chase. I am currently pursuing a Doctor of Ministry. The track specifically is workplace theology and ethical leadership, and I'm looking at doing my research in kindness. And kindness.
I love that for you. And so, you know, as you mentioned, you're a pastor, and I could see how that, also reflects what you are actually doing within the local church, within the body of Christ itself. And so I believe that your research will be an amazing contribution to the kingdom of God. I'm looking forward to you reaching that final step.
I know, and I'm excited about researching the topic. When
Mhm.
I started school, I wasn't sure what I was going to research, so I still didn't even fully understand the process. And when I came to the topic, it was because I realized that for years now, I've really been bothered by just this trend of us being less and less kind. And what was most disturbing for me in my personal observations is Christians, whether it be online, whether it be in terms of Christian led businesses, day to day life, Christians not being the leaders where kindness is
Mhm.
concerned. And so that's really what my research is going to be centering on. And it's a sad that there is something for me to research where that is concerned because it should be natural. We should naturally, as believers, be the leaders where kindness is concerned. But unfortunately, so far my research is proving the opposite. So
Mhm.
excited about it. Just a
I
little
know.
nervous, but excited. Yeah.
So, as you mentioned also in our offline conversations, that you had to do a survey for this research.
I
What was
did.
that like?
Um, so initially, when I started, I did a very small, quick survey with just pastors, and that was to kind of figure out if for pastors, if kindness was something that they focused on teaching,
Mhm.
and if they noticed any variances between generations where kindness was concerned. Because when I initially proposed this thought to my supervisor, um, he thought maybe it's a generational thing. Like maybe millennials are less kind than the older
Mhm.
generations. And so did that in preliminary survey and found that there wasn't much differences with the generations. But then also just looking online, here in the States, it's an election year, and
Mhm.
already you're on pins and needles about how is the Christian witness going to be affected by our kindness in the public square, or when you're talking about politics and various policies. Um, and of course, it's not just limited to that. There are so many other areas in which kindness plays out. But yeah, so doing the larger survey, and this one was actually kind of a bit more interesting because it was very open. So I even had
Mm.
a couple of respondents from outside of the US. I had some respondents from the Caribbean. I had respondents from Asia, from Europe. Um, and the goal of that one was, one, to find out from Christians and non-Christians alike, what are their observations about Christians in kindness? Are Christians outpacing non-Christians in the workplace, on social media, in your day-to-day life? From the Christians, how important is it to you? Do you hear it taught at your church? Do you want to see it or learn of it more in your church? And for non-Christians, and this is where the next step of my research is going to go, is to figure out from non-Christians some ways in which that they've seen kindness displayed by Christians, some ways that they've seen the opposite displayed, and whether or not that affects their consideration or propensity to ever convert and be a Christian, or to just start to attend church, because I am curious to see if their perception of us, where kindness is concerned, if that affects
Mhm.
their willingness to even consider Jesus, right? And that is
Mhm.
essentially answering the question, are we good representations of Jesus? So,
I love
yeah,
that
yeah,
because initially, our lives speak for itself, right? It's not like we're wearing a name tag. Hey, I'm a Christian. I'm a believer.
right,
you know.
right. Exactly. Is that one of our distinguishing factors? Like,
Mhm.
your coworker, can they pinpoint and say something's different about this person? And it's because they consider me above themselves, or they consider others around them above themselves. Like, is that a distinguishing um,
Mhm.
factor? So we'll see. We will see what the research shows us.
Beautiful. Yes. And so this evening we have the privilege for you to share a little bit about what led you to Camille Speaks. And so as the topic of today is when she speaks.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's so funny because I remember growing up, I used to get threatened all the time growing up. I don't know how many people will be familiar with the threat of getting conked in the forehead. The whole
Listen.
to get conked too much.
Yes.
I used to get that threat, boy. My aunts, whenever she would be doing my hair, she would be like, "You chat so much, and I'm conking your forehead."
Uh-huh.
Um, But funny enough, by the time I got into adulthood, I had grown quieter in some aspects. If I'm
Mhm.
comfortable around people, then I can talk for days with some people. But by and large, much quieter. Part of it is because I've grown to be a much more observant person, a much more discerning person. And so when you are more observant, then you use less words. But the
Mhm.
other part of it is also because the world has grown so loud. There's so many opinions and thoughts, and all kinds of things being thrown our way on a regular basis. And getting to a point, for whatever reason, of not thinking that there was much that I had to contribute. And so I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions. And if you talk to me one on one, you'll learn a whole lot of my thoughts and my opinions on things. But I don't really contribute them much in the public square. Um,
Mhm.
and so I remember
We
when
know that.
listen, so I remember in the early stages of Facebook, when you used to be able to write notes on Facebook. And a couple of times I would share an extended note. So this is, a thought that is just too much for a status. And as I shared them and people would comment, eventually I realized maybe I should move it from Facebook and create a blog. And so trying to
Mm-hmm.
land on, well, what should my blog name be? And I landed on Cami Speaks because a lot of times I think people assume that I don't, or that I don't have much to say, which is fine by me. I prefer that. There's a proverb that I learned growing up. Um, you never know. I think it's goat or donkey. I think it's goat. You never know. Goat
Oh
don't have.
Jesus. What are the Jamaican story?
Yes, I think it's something like you never know goat not have teeth until him open the mouth or something like that. So like it's a whole idea of like you, until somebody opens their mouth, you don't know
Mm-hmm.
what what kind of emptiness is behind there, right? So I've
Absolutely.
been really good in learning to just grow more quiet. But there are times when in fact I do need to open my mouth and speak. And so that's where Cami
Mhm.
Speaks came from. And around that time, I'd finally started to be okay with speaking more publicly. So, preaching, things of that nature had just started, which is something I never saw for myself. But then, as time went by, about 2018, the end of 2018, and all throughout 2019, was kind of when the Lord really started to place She Speaks on my heart, and that kind of launched out into the whole She Speaks campaign that went for a while. And so that's where it is now. It's recognizing that we don't all have to speak all the time, um,
Mhm.
but that there are times where we all have to, right? So we all don't have to speak always, but at some point we all do have something to say.
So based on what you mentioned, she speaks. What are some of the pivotal moments, some of the stories that have been shared?
Mm.
What does that look like?
So She Speaks. So I'll give you a little background of how She Speaks came to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
about 2018, or I think it was about 2018, May 2018, some friends of mine were a part of a local community theater group in Fort Lauderdale, in the greater Fort Lauderdale area. And they used to do these bi monthly or quarterly events that were essentially a town hall setting on different topics. And so one month they were doing one for women, a panel of women. I think they called it "Who Run the World Girls," play a
Mm.
play out of the Beyonce song title.
Yeah, I thought
And
about that.
yes, that's exactly what they were playing it off of. And so one of my friends reached out to me, one of the ones that was a part of it, reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you consider being on a panel for women leaders and speak from the standpoint of being a woman minister?" And I was like,
Mm.
I don't have anything much to say on that because I was a fairly young minister. I'd only been an officially licensed minister for about 2 years at that point. Um, but I
So
was
you
just
were
like,
fresh on
okay,
the block.
fresh, fresh. So I eventually conceded, and I was like, okay, no problem. And then I got there, and I was so intimidated. Matter of fact, before I got there, I was intimidated when I saw the persons who would be on the panel, because the rest of the
Mm.
panel was a woman who had been an executive in the NHL, and she and her husband started a coding school. There was a woman who was a professor in gender studies. There was a woman who owned a theater. And I'm like, what I got to say on this kind of a panel? Like, these are legit,
Mm.
bona fide
Mhm.
boss women kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, but at the event, I was really struck by how many questions came my way in comparison to the other ladies. And one of the questions that really struck me was one woman, she stood up and she said, she was a Jew and she had never met a woman in leadership in ministry. And I was surprised by that. And I said to her, well, actually, there's a woman rabbi that I know of up in a Palm Beach area. But
Mm.
also, it struck me as strange because I grew up in a family where my maternal grandmother was a church planter and a pastor in the 40s and 50s. Um, so I've always known women to lead in ministry areas. Our denomination, being a Pentecostal one, is an egalitarian one, and so women have pastored and been ministers for a while. Um,
Mhm.
and when it was finished, a couple of women came up to me afterwards, and I realized in that moment that by me simply being there, though when I walked in the room, I felt like I would have the least to contribute by simply being there and sharing just a little bit. It gave other women in the room from various walks of faith permission to accept the fact that God has use for them. That yes, He has use for us in our family context, in our household context, but He
Mm-hmm.
also has use for us outside of that. That there is an equal call on us to lead, to step into certain roles, but also just the way in which our own story gives people permission. And so about a year later, I launched SheSpeaks campaign and set out to just reach some women and say, hey, do you want to share a little bit about your story? It wasn't a very exhaustive sharing of story. And the reason I didn't make it exhaustive, honestly, is because I knew that most women would say no.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I found in doing it is that a lot of times women more so than men feel as if they have nothing to contribute to the world,
That part.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, especially thanks to the pandemic, there's a little bit of difference in terms of the pandemic helped women realize that from their little living rooms, from their bedrooms, they can start
Mm-hmm.
something and do something virtually, and it can grow and it can be big and it can do great things. But even so, there is still a hesitation about actually speaking, right? Like we're okay with hiding behind a product, hiding behind a service, but
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily sharing our stories. And sometimes it's because we think that our stories are shameful, or we
Mm-hmm.
think that our stories are too small. They're not significant enough. Um, so that was very interesting to try and convince people to just simply share. And it was, I think it was 5 or 6 questions was all I asked for of each woman.
Mm-hmm.
And there was definitely a lot of timidity, a lot of timidity. And so I tried to make it as easy enough, as attractive enough, as soft enough, so that
Mm-hmm.
no one felt like they were being pulled out of their comfort zone, but also asking each woman to end off sharing their story with a simple statement: sis, I give you permission to, and then they filled in the blank for the rest of it. So that was some of my findings. The stories were varied. Stories of there was one woman who had gone through abuse, domestic
Mm-hmm.
abuse, had been through the foster care system, and is now using her life to tell women that they can live above their trauma and that they can
Mm-hmm.
let their stories heal them. Women who were doing work to help others who are in the prison system. Um, and I was really intentional about the kinds of women that I reached out to for the first batch. After that, it was just wide open for whoever else wanted to.
That
But
was my next question. What,
yeah,
what was your targeted population?
it was very varied. So
Okay.
my first batch, I had a woman who does coding and web, like web design and web
Mm-hmm.
coding, things of that nature. I had a woman who serves in public policy in Jamaica, um, one who worked in accounting in the educational field. I'm trying to remember one actually who is my mentor, who's an older woman, um, now an academic, especially in theology, but also not afraid to disrupt where necessary to give other people voice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
who else was in the first batch? First batch had varying ages. So I had um, actually someone that we know mutually. Tamisha was a part of the first batch, who she was
Oh.
in her 20s and yeah, a
Mm-hmm.
creative dynamite. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to, I think probably my mentor at the time was probably one of the older women who were part of the batch. So it covered women from
Very,
the 20s
yeah.
all the way up to 50s, um,
Mm-hmm.
and different walks of life. And the reason why I did that is because I really wanted any woman to find herself in any story. Um, because I think one of the things that sometimes can be very limiting is we sometimes unintentionally create profiles for what thriving and success looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a monolith, right? You can thrive and be successful as a homemaker. You can thrive and be successful as a CEO. You can thrive
That's
and be
good.
successful as a full time volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever place you are in life, as long as you are doing all that you can with all that God has given you, then you are indeed thriving. Um, and also that there is no real cookie cutter blueprint way of getting to whatever our perceived notion of success is, because God uniquely gifts us and uniquely calls us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, in the midst of all of that, is that there is still value in our experience, not just for us, but value for the persons who are looking on. Because sometimes not sometimes, a lot of times, we don't see and know how many
Yeah.
people are looking on, and
People
how,
are watching.
telling you, and
Oh,
how deeply they're being impacted, how deeply genuinely they're being impacted by us simply existing and existing fully as ourselves.
as ourselves. I love that. One, I posted a video, I think it was a week ago, and someone made a comment
Mhm.
and she said, "For a year now, I've been watching you and your heart." I was like, look at that.
Yep. Yep.
It made
Oh, yes.
sense what you just
Absolutely.
said.
Absolutely. Someone was sharing with me recently how they could tell when you spoke on a panel in February. They're like, it broke. It broke.
Mm,
It's a different Sophia coming out of this now. It broke. And I was like, baby. And in that moment, right, it would be uncomfortable,
uh,
but
oh,
you felt that impetus, like it
yes,
is time for me to simply open up and speak.
yes, yes, yes,
And
ma'am.
the freedom that we experience, and
Absolutely.
not to super spiritualize it on the platform, forgive me,
Mhm.
she emerge community, but not to super spiritualize it, but the reality is that the enemy wants us to be quiet,
Yes,
want
to
us to
shrink.
get to absolutely shrink, to never speak, to never. And when we say speaking, it doesn't mean that you have to go bearing your whole life and bearing
Oh,
the gory
right.
detail. That would
Mhm,
actually be irresponsible. We still have to
mhm,
be stewards of our testimony, because
mhm.
we have to be mindful of the audience that's hearing it. We have to be
Yes,
conscious and cognizant of where they are, what they can
yes.
handle, right?
There can be triggers too.
There be triggers, or sometimes we inadvertently enable bad behaviors,
Mhm,
because some younger immature minds might say,
mhm,
oh, if they did and went through all of this, then
mhm,
I can do it. And so
mhm.
we have to be very mindful of that. But even
Absolutely.
just in terms of just speaking generally, we
Mhm,
need to realize that there are things that we've encountered and that we've experienced, that we've learned from, that we can share. And it
mhm.
doesn't always have to be personal.
No.
It doesn't
Mm-mm.
always have to be personal, but it is always going to be helpful
Mhm,
if we're
mhm.
mindful of how we do it.
Yes.
But
I like that because going back to that notion of someone is always watching, because again, our lives speak for itself,
yes.
right?
Yep.
It embodies who we are, the
Yep.
lifestyle that we're living, the Christ that we're representing,
Yep.
and that makes
Absolutely.
sense,
It
you know.
absolutely does. I think about the over the course of the last 2 years, I did not see myself being a pastor. And I
Mhm.
say it often, and at this point, somebody's going to tell me to shut up. But there are still so
Take
many
me
days
to
that
it.
I'm like, I don't even know how this is for real.
Mhm.
Because what? Especially growing up as a PK, I'm like, I know what comes with this. I was not trying to be this. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I, I can share of stories of or interactions that I've had with some younger girls, younger women who are not just impacted, but inspired by
Yes.
me being a pastor.
Mhm.
Not by anything in particular that I'm doing, but simply by me being a pastor. Because
Mhm.
there's one young lady, I won't say any names, who for her, my presence simply means it's okay for a woman to be in charge. That's it. For
Listen.
for another one, it's getting to realize that you know what, God can use her, and she doesn't have to fit this particular mold for
Mhm.
God to use her. Because there's so many things about me that doesn't fit the mold of what I am accustomed to. You just
Mhm.
lean into who God is calling you to be. So even our presence speaks, not just the words from our mouth, but our
Mhm.
presence speaks. And the enemy wins when we tell ourselves that it does not matter, that we don't matter, that our presence doesn't
Our
matter,
stories
that
doesn't
stories doesn't matter,
matter.
that our
Mhm.
yes doesn't matter. It
Mhm.
matters, and it matters deeply. Um,
Mhm.
to not just the next generation, it matters deeply to peers, and it
Yes.
matters deeply even to the ones who came before us, because there are so many who come before us who are growing tired, they're growing weary, they're trying their best to hold things up, they're trying their best to keep things going. And when they can look back and see some of us
Mhm.
step into who God has called us to, it blesses and refreshes them, and it says to them, you can worry less.
Yes. You
you
can
know
relax.
you can relax, you can
Yeah.
step into this next phase, and it will
Mhm.
still be it's still going to be okay.
It's
So
going to
our
be okay.
our yes and our speaking and our showing up has implications that's multi-generational. It has
Mhm.
implications that goes beyond what we can ever truly measure. I was sharing with a woman, a fellow pastor at the women's conference that we were at recently in February,
Mhm.
the Uplift conference, and it just started pouring from my heart to say to her, your impact goes beyond your church. And I don't know if
Mhm.
you recognize that your impact goes way beyond. There are hundreds and hundreds, and because she pastors a very small church, and I'm like, but there are hundreds and hundreds of us who are not members of your church, who are so inspired by you, who have been so blessed by you. And
Wow.
I mean, she just broke.
Hmm.
She did not realize that
The
kind of it.
impact.
And she's at a stage in her life where she is questioning, do I still have value in this way?
That part. It's the questioning, the thoughts,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It Listen, and all of it, you know, I, others have said it in various ways. The enemy does
Mhm.
not play a short game. The enemy plays a very long, long, patient game, a long
Yeah.
game. He
Yeah.
plants seeds
Mhm.
way early in our lives and continue to plant new seeds all throughout, and they are watered through various situations, and they bear
Yes.
fruit at some of the most inopportune.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so a part of our work in rendering his seeds to be useless and rendering his seeds to be powerless is to
Mhm.
continually say yes to God.
Yes to
And
God.
continually saying yes to God means that there are times where it requires us to step into some places we didn't see ourselves being in, step into
Mhm.
some comfortable things, to step into some new things, to step into some things that seems larger than you could imagine or dream for
Mhm.
yourself. And recognizing that all of those things are for his glory, right? Not
That's
for
it.
my gain,
Not for
for my
my
glory. Power to the people who are hustling and grinding for their glory. God bless
Mhm.
you. But as for me, my choice is I say yes and I step into things as
Mhm.
he leads or as he allows. And when you do it, the kind of difference it makes.
Yes.
We mentioned that I'm currently in school,
Mm-hmm.
And when I started the program, I was coming out of a situation that I was like, whew, I need to go to school so I can figure out how to make sure other people don't deal with this
Mm-hmm.
whole different motivation behind it.
Wow.
And what it has become blows my mind constantly. And so since
Bless
February, I've
you.
constantly said to the Lord, I go back to Psalm chapter 8. Who is
Mm-hmm.
that you are mindful of him? For me, it's always, who am I that you are mindful of me? Because we just finished my last residency. We do 3 residencies for the program. Just finished my last residency. And I, I hated this because my program is 7 men and 2 women. And
Mm-hmm.
the 7 men are white Christian married men, and the 2 women are Black single women who are immigrants from third world countries, Jamaica and Kenya. So you want to present that very
Combination, right?
right. So you want to present
Mm-hmm.
that very strong, I'm on
Yeah.
your left kind of a front. But that
Mm-hmm.
last day of our residency, I bawled beginning to end. I was just one emotional person the whole time. And I
Mm-hmm.
was so emotional because it really came crashing on me. Like, God has allowed me to be in this program where people from all different walks of life are a part of it. And my cohort, the group of guys and the girl, they're great. They do great work. They're
Mm-hmm.
amazing people. But also the people who they bring in as our guest lecturers, which is why our program has to travel, because we're meeting leaders in these fields in their countries. And I'm sitting there, just it's hitting me, the kinds of people that I've met over the course of this program, the kinds of
Mm-hmm.
information they share, the access that we have. And I'm like, how? Because I'm not a disciplined student. I mean, I'm naturally a procrastinator. I'm like, how is this making sense? I don't even know if I can do this process. I don't know if I can do this writing. I don't know if I can do this research. I don't even like to do research. I don't like asking a bunch of questions. I don't like people asking me a bunch of questions. Questions are uncomfortable. But then when we were leaving, my supervisor said to me, if he could put me in his pocket and take me home, he would.
Look at that.
In the midst of me being an emotional mess, he and the other professor, they're like, we know this is the worst time to ask you to do it, but can you please do the closing prayer and then end it with a song that you
Mm,
know, like you're always singing? Can you end it
come
with a
on.
and as simple as that may be to people who are not in the room, it meant so much
So much.
because I, in so many ways, don't qualify.
Mm-hmm.
But my presence,
Disqualify yourself, right?
true, absolutely.
Like many others.
But then in that moment, my presence was affirmed,
Oh,
and affirmed not just for me, but what it said to me
amen.
as well is how much my presence mattered to them.
To others. It
Just
goes back to my thought, as always. Two things can be true.
at the same time. We were both. You said it on Saturday, and I was finishing the sentence with you. We're
Yeah.
like, there's a couple of Sophia isms that at this point I can finish. Right?
Okay.
I can finish. Awareness is key.
Yes.
I can finish them.
You can't heal from something you're not addressing.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah,
Listen, you got to name it to heal from it.
very
Mm-hmm.
true, very true. But our presence matters. And I
Yes.
think that it is a work of the enemy for a lot of us to play small. And I'm not at all advocating that we get big headed and puffed up and
Mm-hmm.
arrogant and, all of those kinds of things. Not one bit. Not one
Mm-hmm.
bit. Our confidence should be in the Lord. Um, and that means that, and I think I was making that point even recently, that it is actually a good thing to come from a place of not a false sense of humility, but a true awe of the fact that, and a true wonder that God finds use for us. I think we
Mm-hmm.
should always come from that place, because when we move from that place, then we are prime target for the enemy to play out on, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, there is that very thin line from ensuring that we're not coming from a place, or we're not seeing ourselves in a place that where we disqualify ourselves and then end up
Mhm.
being disobedient. One of
Mhm.
my favorite stories in the Bible, someone once asked if you could be any character in the Bible, or if you see yourself in any character in the Bible, which character would it
Which
be?
character?
And I said, and the person did not approve
Mhm.
of my response, but I
Hmm.
said that I, for a lot of my life, would probably say that I see myself in King um, Samuel. No, not
Mhm.
Samuel. Saul. Sorry, King Saul.
Mhm.
Um, and my goal in life is to ensure that at the end of the day, the Lord doesn't say or feel of me as he did of Saul in the moment, because
Mm.
this is
Say more about that.
this is the story of Saul. So Saul is from the smallest tribe out of the 12
Mhm.
tribes of Israel, right? He's from the tribe of Benjamin, a small tribe. And
Mhm.
within that, he did not see himself as a significant person. But the Bible tells us that he was significant even in his very stature. He stood
Yes.
shoulders above the rest. He had beautiful
Mhm.
hair. He had the whole look. And so Israel is like, give us a king, give us a king, give us a king.
Mhm.
We want a king, we want a king. And Samuel talks to God, and God's like, all right, I have a man. We're going to go with
Mhm.
Saul. Saul saw himself as not that. So when Samuel came to him, Saul's immediate reaction is like, no, nope. You sure? Nah, not me. And Samuel gives him like, well, here are some signs so you know that this is true and this is from God and this
Mhm.
is what it's going to be. And then even so, when the time came for him to be announced, where was he? He was hiding. Man was hiding out by some luggage, big old tall, just hiding.
Just
And
shrinking.
I know that for a lot of people, it's easy to just simply say he had gotten big headed and he was disobedient to God. But when I read his story, and I remember when it hit me was actually late 2018, I was in a class where we were working our way through First and Second Samuel, and I remember
Mhm.
reading it, and it hit me. I mean, like a ton of bricks.
Ton of breaks.
He had like a real self-esteem issue, and that
Mhm.
is what led to his disobedience. Because
Mhm.
in the two incidents that are
Wow.
the Bible, it's that he went with the crowd. I'm sorry if
Yeah.
those notifications are coming through. But it's that he went with the crowd because he was
Mhm.
afraid of the opinions and the thoughts of people. He was afraid of their impatience. He was afraid. So he went with the crowd. One
Mhm.
where he was supposed to be waiting on an answer from God and waiting for Samuel to come back and make the offering to God, but the people started to grumble, so he went ahead and made the offering himself. The other
Mhm.
one was when they had to go in to destroy the Amalekites, and they're like, why would we leave all these people? Why would we kill all of these things? We should get something for our victory. We should get some spoils from it. And so he commanded that they keep these little items as if God doesn't see all things, right?
Mhm.
But it was really always him caving to the people. And there was a verse in particular that, forgive me, I got Bibles all over me, all over.
Listen,
Um, but there was a
I tell
verse.
people all the time I collect Bibles.
Listen, I don't throw them away. There is something in me that's
Ooh.
like, oh no, I can't throw away. I don't care how messed
Mm-mm.
up it is. I can't throw it away. So there's a verse in particular in First Samuel. I want to say it's 15, verse 17, in
Mhm.
case anybody wants to go back to it. Yep. So
Yes.
First Samuel 15, verse 17, where so let me go up a little bit above that. So Samuel says to Saul in verse 16, stop, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And then Saul says to him, tell me. And then Samuel said, and this was the verse 17 is the one that hit me. It said, even though you consider yourself of no importance, you are the leader of the tribes of Israel. The Lord
Mhm.
anointed you king of Israel.
Mhm.
And what that said to me, in one translation, I can't remember which one of the translation, it essentially says, like, even though you see yourself like a dog, the Lord anointed you king.
Yes. Yes.
Man, that
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 part.
constantly. I am in no way um in a perfect place where that is concerned. I have to
Mhm.
always remind myself of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about how I see myself. It's about what God has seen and called me to be. And when I act out of anything other than what he sees and calls me to be, then I am acting out of disobedience.
Yes. Yes.
And like, yes, there is space for us with battling our self-image and all of that. There's space for that. But at some point, we have got to just simply say yes to God, and understand that our yes to God is greater than our battle with our own self-esteem or self-identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to realize that our yes to God has to be greater than anything we tell ourselves and anything that anybody says to us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
it doesn't matter who we are, where we are in life, what
Mm-hmm.
people says of us, what we've done, what we've gone through. None of that matters when it comes on to showing up in this world
Mm-hmm.
fully as God has created and called us to show up to, because he has work for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the work for us is not, lest someone dismiss what I'm saying because they think it means that you have to be working in church. It's not
Mm-hmm.
that you have to be doing work in church, but there are things that God has placed in us and called us to, stories that he has developed in us, or testimonies that he's developed in us, that is for the purpose of freeing someone else, for the purpose
Mm-hmm.
of inspiring someone else, for the purpose of giving
Amen.
other people permission
Yes.
to
Yes.
show, permission to even consider that God could love them.
Yes.
Consider even
Yes.
that there are people who won't even give themselves the freedom to consider that God loves them until they hear the story of a person who has been through some things, yet still
Mm-hmm.
God is using them and
Yet
God loves them,
still. Yet still.
yet still.
Wow. As you were speaking, I couldn't help but wonder about God reauthoring our story for his glory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, he is the master author. I love to say he's the master orchestrator.
Mm-hmm.
There is a it blows my mind to consider if we should pause and think about the fact that we're talking about a God who
Mm-hmm.
created the entire universe, every galaxy,
Let there be. That's all
every
it's.
single kind of system. But he didn't just create them.
Ooh, Jesus.
He is keeping them and ordering them and moving them,
Yes.
aligning them
Yes.
all at once. There is this
Mm-hmm.
beautiful synergy of the great and the small all at the same time that he does.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, every single one of us plays a pivotal role in that masterpiece. Every one
Everyone.
of us. When you're listening to an orchestra, you're listening to the full orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
right? I, the solos are great, the sectionals are great, but when the full sound comes in,
What
it
a resounding.
and it matters
Oh.
to him. It matters to him the full sound, and he
Mm-hmm.
is so attuned to every
Yes.
single instrument in the orchestra that if
Mm-hmm.
one stops playing, he'll know. He'll
It's
know if
off.
one flute stops playing. If the little person pinging the triangle stops, he'll know, because it serves a role in that full
Mm-hmm.
sound. That's how it is for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's a master of this whole great universe. But just as the psalmist asks, who am I that you are mindful of me?
Who am
Yet,
I?
still, if I make my bed in hell, you are there.
He's
He is
there.
the one who said to Jeremiah, I knit you together in your mother's womb. He cares about every single one of us and has
Mm-hmm.
use for every single one of us.
Yes.
And the more we shrink ourselves
Mm-hmm.
by agreeing with the devil, by
Mm-hmm.
agreeing with whatever other lies are going on in our mind, by agreeing by the
Distorted
situation,
messages.
I'm telling you, by agreeing to conditions, we're
Woo.
agreeing to situations and conditions as if they are
Mm-hmm.
greater than
Yeah.
God,
Than
as if they
God.
are more powerful than God. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you're talking about a God who could wipe your slate completely clean.
Ooh.
You remember
Wow.
the movie Men in Black? when,
Yes.
when they show up with that little pen thing and the light flashes and it's like, what happened? Nothing happened.
Ooh.
God has that ability to simply wipe your
He
slate clean.
does. Wipe it clean.
But at the same time, let's not be rushing for our slates to be wiped clean, because that
Mm-hmm.
before story is just as
Hello.
powerful as the after. So
Hello.
more
Yes.
powerful than the
Mm-hmm.
after. But even
Mm-hmm.
so, he has the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't limit him. I can't
Cannot.
limit him. And
Mm-mm.
limiting God feels comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but it comes with a greater price.
It does. Yeah. But I'm thinking of some of the things that holds us hostage.
Hmm.
Shame, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
inner critic, right? That monologue, that
Listen.
conversation you have with yourself, self-loathing.
Listen.
We call it in the clinical space the negative core messages.
Listen.
We
And
get a lot of that.
some of us anointed overthinkers.
Oh,
Huh?
come on.
I'm just saying.
Spiritualizing or spiritual bypass.
Man, we walk heavy in that overthinking space, and we become both the lawyer, the judge, and the jury, and
Everything.
and the bailiff. Like,
Mhm.
those are very dangerous places, and we all
They
go
are.
through it. We all,
Yes.
we can ride on a wave of a high.
Hmm.
You always say, this is another Sophiaism, healing isn't linear.
Hello. Healing is
So
not linear.
we ride these waves and we go through our
Uh-huh.
little moments, and absolutely it happens. I won't discredit it. I won't,
Hmm.
we won't fail to hold space for that. But
Hmm.
at the same time, we don't stay there.
Nope.
We
Like,
don't,
get up, girl. Get
we,
up, girl.
you can't stay there. We can't stay there and allow the enemy's voice to
That's what the
grow
enemy wants.
increasingly louder. We cannot
Mm.
stay there and allow the circumstances of life and the conditions around us to grow
Mm.
louder. We can't stay there. And I remember sharing. I remember I went through therapy back in 2018, 2017, 2018, thereabout.
Mm.
And I went through EMDR, loved it.
Oh,
And so
that's
one of
deep.
listen, and one of the early things you have to do in EMDR therapy is you have to create what they call your trauma timeline. And I remember when I went to therapy, it was not because I thought I went through any trauma.
Hmm.
I simply just felt like I need to talk to somebody.
Just
And I
normalize it.
right. And
I
I was
keep
like,
telling people,
and
normalize therapy.
but it was also like I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just felt like
Yeah.
I need to talk to someone and not
Hmm.
talk like the usual, talking to my best
No,
friend
not your
or something,
friend.
but like talk
Mm-mm.
to someone who can help me process through
Yes.
what I can't quite put my finger on. And I
Yes.
remember when I went to therapy and the first session, which is really more of a discovery kind of a
Hmm.
session, um, and when when the therapist suggested EMDR to me, and I was like, I mean, okay, except I haven't been through any trauma that I need to, disassociate pain from.
Hmm. Hmm.
I just came to talk. Like, I think I'm coming for just talk therapy. And she was like,
It's
okay.
more than
So
talk
we went
therapy.
to the second session,
Uh-huh.
and she said, well, we're going to create a trauma timeline. And she starts walking me through it.
Hmm.
Man, that's when I realized, oh, you have been through some traumatic things in life. I
Yes.
missed some things.
Yeah.
Two of the things that were on my trauma timeline were two different suicide attempts. One, I was
Mm.
a preteen, and the
Mhm.
other one, I was in my early 20s.
Mhm.
And even now, at 41, I cannot tell you what led to them. Like, I can't tell
Mhm.
you what was the trigger. I
Mhm.
can't tell you what was going on. I just remember where I was and what I
Mhm.
tried to do.
Mhm.
And that's important to share because
Yes, that's
other
important.
other people need to realize that what may feel overwhelming and hard to handle, hard to come through now, is not only going to be very minuscule in your rearview mirror, it
Mhm.
may even no longer exist. Like, I don't walk around ever thinking about, because I can't tell you what preteen me was facing when I felt like pop
Mhm.
a bunch of pills and go into bed and hope to never wake up. I
Mhm.
really don't remember. What did I face at
What the
age
stressors
11?
were, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So imagine another 11 and 12 and 10-year-old hearing me share that story and getting to realize, okay, right now it feels like it's unbearable, but I'm gonna keep pressing. I'm gonna keep going because I'm
That
gonna get
part,
to a
keep
point where,
resting.
where, and so again, it goes back to that whole matter of the importance of us speaking.
Yes.
because it is it is of such importance to others who are around us, um,
Mm-hmm.
that we share those kinds of stories. It's important. One of the reasons why I comfortably speak this way now is because I know that I'm pastoring in a different time and place. The enemy is playing.
Different era.
The
Hmm.
enemy is playing the same game, but with some different tactics.
Different strategies.
And these tactics are real slick. It ain't them simple
Ooh,
things
child.
that you could
Mm.
just look at somebody and say, don't do. No,
Mm-hmm.
this is where we're seeing his long game come
Mm-hmm.
to fruition, where some
Yes.
seeds, which are trauma that have been planted throughout the years, seeds,
Multi-generational.
and
Mm-hmm.
even just within our own lifetime, things that
Mm-hmm.
happened in our childhood that are
Yeah.
bearing fruit in adulthood,
Right now.
or where a lot of external factors are
Mm-hmm.
playing a greater sense of importance in people's lives because of its
Mm-hmm.
access to our lives more so than any time before. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important for me serving in this role to comfortably speak this way so that the
Yes.
people that I have any sense of influence or have their
Mm-hmm.
ear can know that, number one, there's a person who believes strongly in God, who believes in
Mm-hmm.
the power of prayer, but who also has enough ability to listen to you where you are. And you don't have to feel shame for feeling the way you feel, but also that I understand that there is a partnership in prayer and the tool of therapy, whatever form of therapy you end
Mm-hmm.
up using, because it is, again, a tool. It is
Yes. It's a
a
tool.
tool.
Like
It is
Dr. Anita says, therapy is a tool and
in your
prayer is a
yes,
weapon. Yeah.
absolutely. And it is
Oh
that
my.
it is that tool that sometimes can be very necessary. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes not just therapy,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the tool that you need to use is psychiatry because
Yes.
of imbalances. And that is okay. Imbalance
That's
doesn't
it.
mean weakness. Imbalance
Yes.
doesn't mean that you were not properly
Mm-hmm.
made. And even that is a language that, as Christians, we have to use more. We have to affirm to people more and more that you are not improperly made. God didn't just start
Yes.
to make you and then stop. He didn't get
Mm-hmm.
confused in the process of making you and say, "Oh shucks, I put the wrong person in the wrong body." Like, we have to be able to give people all of those
Wow.
languages,
Listen.
because otherwise the enemy is having a field
Mm-hmm.
day while
Yes.
we are busy shrinking and just
Shrinking.
into the mold of what is comfortable.
Wow. So as we wrap up, I know time is running.
Yes, ma'am.
What word would you, so many gems dropped, what would you leave our audience with?
Um, I think I'd leave them with a couple of things. One is trust God with you and with your story.
Amen. I love it.
Trust God with you and trust God with your story. He is not going to break you,
Mm-hmm.
to use you.
Mm-hmm.
Trust God with you and with your story. Um, the second thing is that your confidence should always be in what God is doing through you. Because if our confidence is in self alone,
Mm.
it will break.
It will break.
And when it
I love
breaks,
that.
it sends us into distress, it sends us
Yes.
into confusion. Um,
Yes.
so our confidence should be in what God is doing in us and through us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and thirdly, to not show up is to disobey.
Amen. Amen. Love it. Where can everyone connect with you? What are your handles on social
Um,
media?
my handles on most platforms is at Cammy Speaks, and that's the I haven't been writing as much on my website, but that's the website domain as well. So it's cammyspeaks.com. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm just now starting to actually go onto TikTok right when
Mhm.
they're about to ban it. Yay, me. Um,
At that intersection, okay.
but
Oh man.
I'm on Threads and on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, you'll just have to search my full name on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook because somebody else booked Cami Speaks before I did. But yeah, you can also just connect through camispeaks.com. There's a contact page there if you want to reach out personally. Yeah.
Love
And
it.
also, if people want to go read some of those She Speaks stories, then they are on camispeaks.com, or you can find them on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know time is money, like Jamaicans would say, but it was such a joy having you in this space.
It was
And
my honor. Thank you so much for having me.
you're welcome. All right, everyone. You have heard Cami speak. I say, when she speaks, wow. Yes. We thank God for her and thank God for what He's doing in her life. So until the next podcast, be well. Have a good rest of your night, everyone.